all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shecup.
And we are here for a long-awaited character deep dive. It's been a long time since we've done a character deep dive. I'm excited about this one. But first, before that, Shelby, we have a guest with us today.
Yes, we do. So welcome, Kane.
Hey.
So, okay, our listeners, if you're in the Discord, you might know Kane as Sergeant Major Mac Tir in Discord. We've got a couple names going on, but you always are in the Discord. Every time somebody brings up Loghain, you are there to chime in on the conversation. Yes. And I mean, he is such an interesting character. Probably not going to have any consequences at all on the next game on Veilguard, but he is a fascinating character that has had a lot of implications in like all of the lore up till now. Who knows what's going to happen? But if you're here listening for updates on Veilguard, not the episode, check out the one from the previous week. But if you're here for Loghain, you are in the right place. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of a content warning. There is some sexual assault in Loghain's backstory. So if that's something that is hard for you, please feel free to skip this episode. It won't be, a majority of his episode, but it is there. And we just wanted to make sure that everyone knew. So that's the first thing. But unless anybody has anything else, I think we're ready to jump in and get into the fun facts and trivia. Fun facts. Number 1, Loghain is actually the first character that David Gaider ever wrote for Dragon Age Origins, which is really awesome. And I definitely think, just my opinion, I think it shows. I think you can very much tell that he is so fleshed out. He's just present in the game more than you would expect for like your everyday villain. Technically, he's not like the villain of the game, but he is an antagonist.
I would totally agree on that because 1000% he keeps getting more complicated, in my opinion, throughout the games, all the way in Inquisition. And that's kind of a crazy thing. You don't really see that much complexity in a lot of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And his appearance in Inquisition is like my favorite thing of all time. One of my easily top 5 favorite moments in Dragon Age, which we'll talk about when we get to Inquisition, but let's move on for fun facts. So I do have a fun lore discrepancy here. So in the Stolen Throne, Loghain introduces himself with his last name as Mac Tir. But then in the Arms of Mac Tir Codex entry, it says that his last name was given to him by Maric after the Battle of the River Dane, and it means, quote, son of the land. So just a fun discrepancy. I know Kane has a little bit of a theory on this one, but I find it very interesting that he is simultaneously the character that was written first, and also we still have lore discrepancies with him. I find that hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. There are actually, we've talked about this a little. There's a lot of strange little tiny discrepancies between like book and game lore with him. And I think it might just be a callback to the fact that he was such a fleshed out character that typically when someone has like a lot of love for a character, they sort of adjust their like opinions of them over time. If you start with something and end somewhere else, it might have a little bit of difference. But yeah, the name thing for sure is interesting.
Yeah, and I think we see that a lot with the Stolen Throne, especially since it was the first one I think that was written, and it is the first one chronologically too. It's kind of like there are so many lore discrepancies. Like Antiva is called Calabria, like throughout the book, and there are several other things, but that's the one that sticks out to me most. And it's like, how is this not caught? But it probably just went to print before they could fix some of those errors. But I find it hilarious.
I don't know. Maybe the name I had said something to you at one point, just in casual conversation, but I feel like there might be a little tiny, possibly dumb theory I have that is like the idea of being of the land and like not having a home, so you don't really have a place to be attached to, so you're just of the land. Because he was pretty young when everything went wrong. His family like lost everything. That's kind of my theory on that one. And then he gets the actual title when he sort of, we'll talk about this later, obviously, but when he gets an actual place to be named after, he gets more of a title with it.
I definitely totally agree with that. Like this might be something like we see like with the last name Snow in Game of Thrones, where only important people have surnames.
Exactly.
But it might also be like I think it offers a theory for both of these things to be true. Because Loghain could introduce himself as Loghain Mac Tir, like establishing himself as a commoner to all of these people. But then after the battle over Dane, Maric makes Mac Tir a house.
Exactly. Yeah. That I think that is sort of like the idea of giving him that as like a name is sort of a big deal thing. And that's, yeah, exactly what you said. I kind of feel the same way.
And I do think that that's almost like this is almost less of a theory and more confirmed in my mind because we already know in Ferelden culture and lore that commoners don't have surnames. They are, oh man, I can't even think of one right now, but typically they're referred to like if you're from Dinnerum, if I was from Dinnerum, I would be like She Cup of Dinnerum. Like you're just known by wherever you're from, your location, your hometown, rather than an official name. So to me, I'm like, okay, this is kind of like just lore, not necessarily a fan theory.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about appearance for a minute because this is another a little bit of a lore discrepancy. So in Origins, Loghain has darker colored eyes, like almost grayish. And then in The Stolen Throne and The Calling, he is described with having icy blue eyes and like cold eyes. And then again in Inquisition, he is back to having the kind of like gray blue eyes. So I feel like in Inquisition, they're kind of like trying to bridge the gap between the description in the books and in the games.
I would say so. And there's also another like small one that is this is me being a psycho about reading stuff about him, but in Stolen Throne, more than once they say like in reference to his hair curls, like they'll say like brushing a curl from his face or like a curl over something, and then he has like bored straight hair in every single one after that.
Yeah, like it's so straight. Maybe, and I'm like
Mm-hmm.
looking at pictures of him now, like it truly is. It is so pin straight, but
Yeah.
maybe they're referring to the bangs rather than the real. I don't know. I'm just
It
trying to make a way.
me being a
What does
crazy
he look
person,
like on the cover of Stolen Throne?
it's like 90s boy band style, like swoopy backy kind of thing. Yeah, no, it's probably just David Gaider went with just saying like a curl as meaning a strand of hair, but in my head, me being a crazy person, I just latched onto it and I was like, "Whoa, curly hair!" The first time I read it, but then that obviously
But
that's
that's
not the case.
also yeah, but that's also like not what curl means. Like you say curl, that means one
No,
specific thing, not just like a lock of hair. But
right?
we
Well,
we
Yeah.
don't we don't need to get into the David Gator slander today. I've participated in enough this
yeah.
week.
Well, I just say that like he does have a weird like writing style where he like focuses on body parts that I don't think he understands. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is he obsessed with broad shoulders?
Let's get into Loghain's general backstory. So Loghain was born sometime around 878 Blessed Age, which makes him about 18 at the beginning of the Stolen Throne and about 58 in Dragon Age Origins, which I definitely feel like that's older than Wynn.
Oh yeah.
Which is hilarious to me because their appearances are definitely swapped, but whatever. And he was also born as a freeman, which is a class or social tier in Ferelden. And I didn't actually know this when I was doing research. So I had to look up what a freeman was. And so the freemen, they basically comprise all of the commoners, except for merchants and craftspeople. And so then the freeman category is kind of split up into like high freemen and low freemen. So Loghain's family is a high freeman family, which means prior to the war, I should say, which means that they typically owned land, they were soldiers, or they had some kind of stable employment. Like they were able to make it work. Life was probably still really hard for them, but like they were able to eat, they were not starving. Life was okay. Whereas a low freeman was somebody who was homeless, an elf who lived in an alienage, criminals, people who didn't work, those kinds of things.
So we can encounter freemen in Dragon Age Inquisition.
Freemen of the Dales. So that would be Orlais, and I don't think they have the same kind of class system. And I think that they are an official named group. So the name is just a coincidence. So like a freeman in Ferelden would be more of like freeman, the title would not be like a proper noun. Whereas a freeman of the Dales, that is a proper noun. That is like a title. That is an organization that they are belonging to. Let's get back into Loghain's childhood so that we know his father was Gareth of Oswin, and he does make an appearance in The Stolen Throne. We don't know his mom's first name. She also makes a brief appearance in The Stolen Throne. But when Loghain was a kid, he and his family, they found a Mabari puppy who had wandered into their shed on their property. Loghain named her Adala, and his mom would often say that she was a gift from the maker. The family had her for about 10 years before an Orlesian stole her to use for breeding with his hunting dogs. About 6 months later, Loghain was reunited with Adala when the Orlesian asshole threw the Mabari out of a moving wagon. The dog was, very thin, skin and bones, and very weak, and it would end up dying just a week later while in Loghain's lap. Incidentally, Loghain does not get along with any of the warden's companions except for Dog. He seems to love the Mabari companion and will share stories of Adala with him, or her, as well as offers the Mabari treats like cheese and ham. So this is a really sad story, heartbreaking story, but I think it's one of the first stories we have that illustrates Loghain's character, especially his characterization as it relates to hating Orlesians. Like the man has never had a positive interaction with any Orlesian ever. And if he ever does, which we're not told about, if he ever does, he's going to view that as a one-off. They're breaking the rule rather than being the rule. Like they're the exception. All Orlesians are cruel, terrible, awful human beings to Loghain.
I think this story also just sets up like the things that the people of Ferelden and the people of Orlais value. For Ferelden, a Mabari is a companion. It is a friend. It is something that you treat. That Mabari are almost to Ferelden what Hala are to the Dalish. And to Orlais, they're just hounds. They're just animals. They're just a tool to be used.
I would also probably say less of a in-universe thing and just sort of like a life and trope thing. A poor kid who has very little, or a poor kid who maybe grew up outside of a lot of areas, would put a lot of value in a pet companion, and that getting taken away would put a lot of significance.
To me, it is cruel regardless of your culture, regardless of if you are Orlesian and just view an animal as an animal. But like at the end of the day, to me, this story is so important. It is so minor, but it's so important because yes, it illustrates Loghain's character, but it also shows us how deep the cultural differences between Ferelden and Orlais are. I think a lot of times we're just like, oh, Ferelden's like the podunk, like rustic, and Orlais is the like nice, posh, wealthy area. And the reality is the cultural differences are so much deeper than that. And the role of the Mabari is one of the principal ways that they are different from one another, and that's really significant.
I would also say it's, as you kind of like said at the beginning, it's also super significant. It kind of sets up his life as he's just going to have one tragedy after the next, whether it be
Mhm.
by his hand or not. He's going to have one tragedy after the next.
It's so interesting because of Flemeth's words to Maric in the Stolen Throne. They also apply to Loghain. I think every time for Loghain, every time he's betrayed, it's worse and worse than the time before it.
No, but you're right. Absolutely. And it also makes sense because, she says Loghain will hurt Maric more and more, but he is hurt more and more. So a hurt person, they're going to lash out,
Mm-hmm.
like hurt people hurt other people. And that's just kind of the way it is. Let's get back to the Blessed Age. Because at some point after the dog dies, we're not really sure the timeline here. We just know sometime later, the Orlesian emperor basically says, okay, all of you Ferelden freemen have to pay a tribute tax to me, to the Orlesian emperor. And so Gareth, Loghain's dad, he refused to pay it, which means then that he is accused and guilty of tax evasion. Subsequently, he lost his land as a result. And so the Orlesians, they come to take their land and the family fights back. And this, just as a pause, this is kind of where the content warning is going to come into play. So if you need to pause, feel free. So the Orlesians come to Loghain's family's homestead and they fight. And obviously Loghain's family, they can't hold a candle to train Chevalier, like obviously. And so the Orlesians pretty easily best them in combat, and they force Loghain and Gareth to watch as the soldiers raped and killed Loghain's mother. And so this obviously is horrific, a cruel and unusual punishment. And this is really where that hatred of Orlais is solidified in Loghain's memory and life forevermore. And even when we see him in Origins, decades after the war, he is still not even okay with Kaelin writing letters to the Orlesian ruler. This is a lifelong, and understandably so, it's a lifelong prejudice. And I think he has every right to feel that way about Orlais when this is his life story.
Yeah, it's definitely a tragic one, that's for sure. I hate to just keep saying the same thing, but it sets up the fact that, like, when people are hurt, I was going to joke a second ago that if you had to title this episode not his name, it'd be Hurt People, because that's pretty much his whole character.
Yeah. That's so true. It really is. Maybe I'll make that the subtitle. So after this happens to his mom, his dad, Gareth, disappears for 3 days. And when he returns, he reveals that he has killed the Orlesians who did this as in an act of vengeance. And so that obviously means they now have to leave their town of Oswin. And that is how they get to where they're at of leading the fellow Fereldans in the beginning of the Stolen Throne. Now, we'll talk about Loghain's involvement in the Stolen Throne, the Calling, Origins, and Inquisition after the mid-break. But first, I want to skip forward a little bit to give you just some information about what Loghain does in between the times where we see him portrayed. First one to talk about is Mother Eylis. She is a major character in the Stolen Throne, and we know via Codex, via the conclusion of that book, that at the end of the Stolen Throne, after the end of it, Loghain seeks out the survivors from his outlaw camp. And so he reunites with the Mother Eylis while at a hospital in the Korcari Wilds. And this is funny because the Dragon Age wiki page for Loghain actually says, direct quote, "In a rare display of emotion, Loghain swept her up in his arms and rejoiced at the event," end quote. Which is funny to me because it's kind of like, when have we ever seen Loghain give such a display of emotion? When have we ever seen him rejoice at anything? So to me, it's like, this is a significant moment for him because this is a childhood parental figure for him that he's reuniting with, that he probably thought was dead. She then shows Loghain where she spread Gareth's ashes, and so they're able to kind of mourn together. And then there is another battle called the Battle of Avanash. And there's a Codex entry that kind of explains this one. It's titled The Summer Sword. And this is a story of when Loghain met an Orlesian named Louis. He is the youngest sword of Lord Aurelian of Montsimard. And so they met one another in the Battle of Avanash. And when I say met, I don't mean like chatting, talking. I mean like fighting. So the young Louis, he lost his sword pretty early in battle, but found himself somehow facing Loghain near the end of the battle for a 1v1 fight. Louis only had the summer sword, which he had never used before, and was quickly, easily, single-handedly defeated by Loghain. And so as a result, Loghain took the sword as a trophy. And I do believe that you can find this sword in Origins. It's a great sword. And the person that wields it is actually Sir Cothrian, who is Loghain's kind of second in command, the female warrior. So to me, it kind of lends me to believe Loghain gave it to her as kind of a token of his loyalty.
Honestly, genuinely, the only time you ever see any joy from Loghain at any point in anything is maybe some moments with Rowan in those early parts there, and it's immediately swept up by guilt right after. So genuinely,
Yeah.
I think his moment with her, with a sort of mother figure, is one of the only ones. And I think him being a young man might be the reason why that's the only time. He just hardened by life after that.
Yeah, true. Well, then let's talk about his life in at least when he's leading the town of Gwarin, because this part didn't really fit in any other section. So we're going a little bit chronologically out of order this week, but you'll just have to bear with me. So, after the war against the Orlesians, Maric gifted Loghain the Tairneer of Gwarin to rule over, which elevated Loghain to nobility. However, this gift definitely had a lot more drawbacks than positives, because the city of Gwarin was in complete and utter disrepair. So when he gets to Gwarin after its liberation, Loghain basically takes one look at the manor, at his what's supposed to be his new home, and he's like, yeah, I'm not staying here. And so instead, he chose to live inside of a tent that he set up in the middle of the courtyard while seeing to the harbor's repairs. And he's like not focused at all on the manor at all. So eventually, after about a month, the people of Gwarin are pissed off naturally. They're like, our new lord is a dick. He won't live in the house. He only cares about the harbor. Like, what the hell is going on? So they decide on a representative. They're like, somebody has got to go talk some sense into this man. So the representative they choose was a young woman named Celia. The townspeople sent her because they wanted to know if Loghain was going to abandon the keep and the manor and the village pretty much entirely in the way that the previous Orlesian lords had. As you can probably imagine, this conversation was definitely not the best way to approach Loghain, comparing him to an Orlesian. So it sets him off, and the conversation between him and Celia very quickly, like almost immediately, devolves into just them shouting at each other. In the end, Celia tells Loghain that he's not going to be the Terran of anything unless the bands and the freeholders swear fealty to him, which they will never do if you continue to let Castle Gwarin crumble. So Loghain begrudgingly follows her advice, and he then appoints her as the supervisor of the keep's repairs. 2 months after that, he would ask Celia to marry him, and she accepts. In the coming years, and especially after Rowan dies, Loghain does not spend much time at Gwarin at all. He spends a lot of time in Denerim with Maric. So Terna Celia ruled Gwarin in his stead, and he often would take Honora to court with him. So they very much have a marriage of separation almost. Now, it should be said that Loghain's biggest foe during this time is not Orlais, which makes sense because Gwarin is on the far eastern coast of Ferelden, so it's pretty much as far away from Orlais as Loghain could get. So the biggest foe he has during the time he is at Gwarin is a woman called Lady Rosamond. And she is kind of an outlaw, but she like her and Loghain had a lot of like back and forth encounters over the years, and finally he sends an army to hunt her down, and they travel through the Korkari wilds. While the attempt was successful in capturing Rosamund in an area near a place called Barshamp, which I had never heard of before this, the outlaw apparently still managed to escape on the first night of her captivity, despite being bound, gagged, and in chains due to the thieves' tools that were concealed in her gloves. And this information can be found in the Lion's Claws Codex. So I think after this, she doesn't really give Loghain a lot of trouble anymore, but she's definitely a thorn in his side before they capture her and she escapes. So that's kind of everything we know about Loghain outside of the games, outside of the major books. Do we have any thoughts so far about anything we've talked about before we go to our mid-break?
Bro had the most problematic riz on the planet. Some lady came to tell him he was doing his job bad, and they got married.
I mean, I kind of get it though, because it's kind of like Loghain could never marry someone who is like a pushover. Loghain could never marry like a traditional lady of Ferelden. Like he has to marry someone. He has to be with someone who can give it back to him just as much as he can give it to somebody else. So in that way, I kind of understand it. But it sounds to me, you know, the phrase like opposites attract, that is not the case here. Like they're so similar, at least from what we know of Celia. So it's kind of like, I imagine there's probably a lot of arguing in their household.
I was just going to say, it's also really funny because Celia rules Gwarin because Loghain is uninterested in it because he really just wants to be back. I feel like Loghain is always chasing a return to the life before his mother died. And I think that it's so interesting to me because Celia rules Gwarin because Loghain isn't interested. And if we take Anora's word, she rules Ferelden because Kaelin is not mature enough or interested to actually rule the kingdom.
I was going to say, realistically, they probably just have a completely loveless marriage. Like, it was pretty much just circumstance. That's the unfortunately less fun version of that, is they probably just don't care. But yeah, no, I think that is super interesting. I think there's definitely something to be said about the fact that I would argue it's not that he's chasing the life he had before, and more so that he had some sort of, I don't want to say easy, but what was easy for him when him and Maric were doing, when they were fighting, when they were doing all the things they needed to do to get a sense of stability. And so he wants that simple back. It's not really that, he wants that version of simple back, essentially, that he had with him. So he keeps chasing Maric everywhere, just hoping that some sort of conflict will make that quote unquote simple time for him.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. It's more of like he wants his life to be less complicated. And I think it's kind of an erroneous conclusion on his point of view, because his life was never simple. Like it was always complicated. He just had friends back in the day and now he doesn't.
I would also argue it's like which is simpler: get up, eat, fight, go to sleep, and hope that you win, or politics.
Right. So let's go to our mid-break and then we'll come back and talk about his involvement.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Varric, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Assyrian Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabella, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Varric, does Hawke ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawke's signature on it.
Welcome to the middle of the show where we just take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. Also, a special thank you and welcome to our newest patron, Hassel the Hoff. Thank you for subscribing on Patreon and joining that. We greatly appreciate your support. If you'd like to join us too, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. Another great way to support us, if you can't support us financially, is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us a kind review with 5 stars, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And so today, our review comes from Apple Podcast. This comes from Dragonsbane 738, and they say, awesome, 5 stars. As a longtime Dragon Age fan since Origins, and have currently been playing on my Xbox 360 since my one broke down, but playing the games and listening to this podcast makes me feel better. Thank you guys for all the work you do. Thank you so much for that review. We are greatly excited that you love Dragon Age and that you get something out of this podcast. That is why we do that. Lastly, I want to invite you to come and join our Discord if you want to talk about Veilguard. If you want to talk about all the crazy things that have been released, but if you want to talk about all of that, if you've got things you are just burning on your heart to say and you have no one else to say to them, come and join our Discords, The Cup Podcasting and more, and you will find a bunch of people who are eager to hear whatever you have to say about Dragon Age. It's a great place to be, one of the best places on the internet. And with that, that's all I have for the middle of the show. I think we're ready to get back into it.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glittery, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like 2 wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnic's waist. He...
What?
Nothing. What is that?
Isabella just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right. So let's talk about his involvement in the Dragon Age universe. So we're just very, very, very briefly, like so briefly, one sentence, going to talk about the things we've already discussed. Like we've already discussed Stolen Throne, the calling, and the games. So it's going to be brief. So in the Stolen Throne, he is one of the main 3 characters, along with Rowan and Maric. They lead the rebellion against Orlais. They succeed. In the calling, he is very briefly in the calling at the very beginning and the very end. He's kind of supporting Maric after the death of Rowan. Duncan basically says Loghain's kind of the real king. He's doing all the work, despite having, supposedly a beautiful wife and a young daughter in Gwarin. Loghain stays in Denerim. And he's suspicious of the Grey Wardens and saves Maric and all the things. So the other thing that I want to talk about is Maric's disappearance. So as you may know, Maric disappears at sea, and that's kind of how he dies. They're not really it's very unknown for a long time. And so he disappears at sea while en route to Wycombe in the Free Marches in 925 Dragon. So Loghain spends about 2 years searching for Maric, consuming, a majority of the royal treasury and most of the Ferelden navy in this process. The search is futile. He has no results. When Loghain claimed that Orlais is the one that had purposefully sunk Maric's vessel in order to prevent Ferelden and the Free Marches uniting, he was basically called off by Honora and the bands because they were like, this is too far. Like your hatred for Orlais is too much. Like they did not do this. They felt like it was time to mourn King Maric. Like we've got to move on as a country. And so in 927, a massive state funeral was held in Denneram's chantry for King Maric. King Maric's death and Honora's marriage to King Kane put an end to Loghain's visits to Denneram for a time. He returned to his wife Celia and Gwarin, and they remained in relative peace and quiet for the next 3 years. It's when Terrana Celia dies in 928 that things change. So the entire royal court goes to Castle Gwarin for her funeral. And when they left, Loghain left with them, and he never returned to Gwarin.
I would say, honestly, the only thought I have is the fact that the reason he didn't go back to Gwarin, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but the reason he never went back to Gwarin was he didn't really want to be there in the first place. So now that he didn't have the obligation to his wife, essentially, to like, oh yeah, she's there, I got to go back and see how she's doing. He was like, I'm out. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, and I do think, I know you said earlier that you feel like the marriage is really just a marriage of convenience, but I feel like him leaving and never going back kind of tells me that he did care for her, at least somewhat, like maybe only on a platonic level, maybe not a romantic level. Who knows? We don't know. But to me, I feel like you're not just going to leave and refuse to never go back to a place that if you don't have some emotional attachment to it like that, at least a little bit.
I would say that makes sense. I'd also say, while this doesn't necessarily mean anything about his marriage, he definitely loves Honora. So if I'd probably be willing to bet that since she doesn't seem to have anything negative to say about her mom, if they both loved her, then there was at least that.
True. Yeah.
I think one of Loghain's key characteristics is that he, ironically, like this, if you just played Origins, what I'm about to say would probably sound so foreign to you, but Loghain's key characteristic is his loyalty. It just 100%. so happens that his primary loyalty is to his own survival. So any loyalty that comes after that, him and his family's own survival. But any loyalty that comes after his own survival is something that can be thrown away, as long as it's not threatening his survival, because he is a survivor. That is something that we have to categorize Loghain as. He is a survivor. He will be loyal. Like, he spends 2 years looking for Maric because that's his friend. It's not because Ferelden needs the king. Loghain doesn't think Maric is a good king, but that's his friend, and he goes and looks for him.
Yeah, I could not agree anymore. I had thought a lot about the fact that, like, I would say some people would definitely call him like an unloyal character. Like, that's a whole thing, because it's literally the whole point of Origins, like you said, is that he's treacherous. He literally is a traitor, and that's his whole thing. But it's because he was never loyal to Kane. He knew it was another whole situation where it's another king that doesn't do his job, and he didn't care. Every character he's ever shown any sort of care in his sort of way about, he is very much like to the death about.
Yeah, and I think it's like very much you have to prove yourself to Loghain. But once you have, and once he decides you're on his side, you're good. You're good. You could do anything. You could kill a man in front of him and he would still defend you. Okay, let's get into Origins a little bit. Again, we're not going to talk about everything. We're just going to give you the overview because you can go play the game. I know a lot of people haven't played Origins, but I really recommend it because it's a good game, but it is old, so I understand. Anyway, so in Origins, Loghain, I would argue, is the primary antagonist, not the villain, but he is the primary antagonist, especially emotionally, of the game. You first meet him as an advisor to King Kalen Theron in Ostagar. So, just to sum it up, Loghain betrays you pretty early on in the Battle of Ostagar, which leads to the king and all of the wardens who are there dying. After this, he basically puts out a Ferelden's Most Wanted list for your character, like he's trying to hunt you down because you know that he left the battlefield when he was supposed to rush in and save you. So he's trying to kill you. And he also has a main advisor of Rendon Howe, who is pretty unambiguously evil character. You can learn more about him if you play the Awakening DLC, as he is the father of one of your companions. But Loghain and Rendon, they very much take some drastic measures to make sure that Ferelden is quote-unquote safe in their mind. So this includes allowing elves to be sold into slavery to Deventer, employing the apostate Jowan to poison Arl Eamon Garen, soliciting circle mages for their allegiance and promises in exchange for promises of greater freedom, imprisoning and torturing prominent individuals that could possibly become political liabilities, and hiring Zevran Ariani and Antivan Crow to assassinate the remaining Grey Wardens. So, these are unambiguously bad guy behaviors. Clearly, obviously. And on top of all of that, rumors abound that Loghain himself is trying to steal the throne away from his daughter, while others argue that he was just doing his job as commander. He's just, obviously trying to protect his people amidst a losing battle. That's kind of the rumors that abound in Thedas. Now, at the end of Origins, you can recruit Loghain to the Grey Wardens, or you can kill Loghain. Those are kind of your two options. And if you kill him, Honora builds a statue of him overlooking the Orlesian embassy, which pretty much everyone except for Honora ignores. I find that hilarious. Now, if you recruit Loghain to the Grey Wardens, there's a few different things that happen. He can either die and make the ultimate sacrifice, or he can continue on as a Grey Warden and then become the Grey Warden that appears in Inquisition, which is a great transition to what happens in Inquisition. So if you complete the Dark Ritual, he appears, and it's so good. I have a quote from this later when we get to our quotes section, but in Inquisition, his appearance is so freaking good. I can't even begin to illustrate. The writing is so excellent because you see a person who finally sees himself for who and what he is. He has absolutely no thoughts of grandeur. He has no, claims that what he has done is good. He has no kind of I want to repent and I'm going to be good now. No, he knows what he is. He's yeah, I suck. I made terrible decisions and now I'm a Grey Warden and that's my life. He is so truthful about who he is. And him appearing in Inquisition, if you've never done it before, I highly recommend it because it is such a full circle moment to leave him in the Fade.
I would say I'm 100,000% biased, but I think it takes something away from the series as a whole to not have that conclusion to his story arc, considering he is your first big bad guy in the first game. Obviously, we can talk about that more when we get to little wrap up thoughts or whatever, but he concludes a really important story arc if you have him in Inquisition, in my opinion. And obviously, everybody has their own opinions about what to do with him in Origins, and fully understand those decisions. But keeping him alive makes for his story arc to be so much better, so much better. It gets to grow as a character as opposed to just dying at the end. Oh well, bad guy's dead.
And it's such a shitty choice you have to make because I think Alistair is so short-sighted in that whole interaction. And I get that he's young and that Loghain killed the one real father like killed and attempted to kill the two real father figures that he had in Orlais and Duncan, even though Loghain didn't actually kill Duncan. But it's just so short-sighted, and it shows to me that Alistair is not really ready to be a Grey Warden. He's not ready to stop protecting people from the Blight above everything. But you as the Warden can be there. And I remember Shelby, when she first played Origins, was so mad because she was like, this is the tactical move. We need Grey Wardens. There's not a lot of us. We need to make Loghain a Grey Warden.
Yeah.
And she was so mad at Alistair's reaction.
I hate because so much. It's so immature. And like, I get it. But I do feel like a hardened Alistair would not make that choice.
No, he's young, and that makes sense that's kind of his reaction. It's brash or whatever. And like you pointed out, Austin, he also just lost like a lot of his fatherly figures. He lost all those things. So of course he has a really dramatic reaction to seeing the person he blames for that. And you saying like, well, actually, we kind of need to keep this guy around. He might be helpful. I mean, I can understand that being a super dramatic reaction and be like, nah, get out of here. No chance. And just being mad and running away. But it also sucks just for, I don't want to spoil things, like you said, for people who haven't played it that need to. But it also sucks to have to make that kind of decision at the end, the things that you have to make. Because in my mind, you kind of have to make a decision that's terrible. Because, and like I've talked about, I want to keep him around because his story's not done. Which means that, unfortunately, I have to let my warden die there. And I hate that, but I feel like that makes the story make most sense.
Yeah. When we're getting to Dragon Age Inquisition, I really wish there was a way that you could keep Loghain alive and have Alistair be king.
Yes.
Because I want a universe where Alistair gets to tell Loghain that he found Maric.
Yeah. I mean, he's not alive when that happens in the comics, but yeah.
Loghain never gets closure on anything. He never gets the point. Rowan dies of whatever, the Padme treatment, and they don't really get to they don't really reconcile in that. Like, he doesn't see anything that he has worked on other than like freeing Ferelden really come to fruition. And I just think Alistair being able to tell Loghain, like, hey, like, here is what happened, so Loghain can know and have closure and have something that's not left as an open end. I want that.
I completely agree. And I would also say that because he never gets that, I would say the only quote unquote closure he gets, the only thing that comes to fruition, as you pointed out, is his daughter becoming the queen. That's literally the only thing. And even then you'd argue it's like barely his thing at that point. I mean, he did care about her and he obviously fathered her, but it's still just like, he didn't do it, she did it.
Right, absolutely. So we're kind of getting into discussion a little bit. So real quick, let's go through some quotes and characteristics for him. So the first quote I have is Loghain talking to the warden. And before I read it, I should say I kind of picked all of these quotes because I feel like they together describe his character. So the first one, he's talking to the warden at the end, I guess, once you reach a certain approval with him in Origins. And so he says, I underestimated you, Warden. I thought you were like Kaelin, a child wanting to play at war. I was wrong. There's a strength in you I've not seen anywhere since Maric died. I yield. And then the next one, when he is asked about the Orlesian occupation of Ferelden, he says, hate doesn't describe it. I've seen painted masked lords beat an old farmer to death with riding crops. To this day, I don't know why. Is that hate? I saw good, sensible men fighting armored chevalier with nothing. No weapons, no armies, not even hope of success, to see the occupation end. Is that hate? The third one is from Inquisition. I think it's from Inquisition. And he says, please, I have done so much wrong. Allow me to do one last thing right. And then this last quote is the one that I think sums up his character arc perfectly in Inquisition. And this is in the Fade, when the nightmare demon is taunting you and taunting your companions. And so the nightmare says, Terran Loghain Mac Tir, the brilliant commander. Pity, the one time you tried to rule, you failed so miserably. You had to be beaten, humiliated, lest you destroy your own country. You even doomed the wardens by bringing the Inquisitor down on them. You destroy everything you touch. And Loghain responds by saying, is that all you've got? It's nothing I've not said to myself.
I'm just going to say something that's probably going to piss off a lot of fans of a certain universe. But Loghain is everything the Snape lovers think Snape is.
Ooh, tea.
Ooh, yeah, hot take. Let's talk shit about Harry Potter. Come on, keep it cooking.
Like, everyone talks about Snape like he loved Lily but like Snape doesn't do anything that redeems himself. And like, I would argue that like Snape isn't brave. Loghain is so brave. Like most people, Sarah, Varick, even Solus, like they cower in the presence of the nightmare, but not Loghain. Loghain looks it right in the face and says, come at me. You can't do anything to me that I haven't done to myself.
He is a bitter old man who's like, nah, I ain't taking your shit no more. I ain't doing this. I've been through enough. I don't care at that point.
And like he has nothing else to lose, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what else does he have in the world? Like he doesn't have a home, he doesn't have friends, he doesn't really have family, he doesn't have a love. Like, yeah.
Okay, so this is getting into semantics, and if you have something else to say, please cut me off. But
oh, you're good.
But for me, a lot of that decision with Inquisition about like what you do with him during the time when you're in the Fade, it comes down in mine to Loghain and Hawke, and I think a lot of his story arc feels so purposeful with that because Hawke in mine is a romancer of Fenris, you know, an elven romance essentially, and Hawke is always most people tend to play Hawke as a little bit chaotic or whatever. The idea that you get to be like, okay, Loghain's character arc, you know, he's been through all these things. He's seen so many men like their downfall be because they have some sort of hots for an elf here and there. Because as we've talked about, a lot of Maric was not a great king, but I guess he quote unquote tried his bestest with Loghain as the actual person doing it. But the wrap up being that he gets to go, you know what? I'll take this bullet. I'll do this. And let's all of the other ones, the Inquisition, let's Hawke, let's them go on to try to actually make the world a better place because he knows he can't. Makes a lot of sense for me. And that's I just think that's a great conclusion to his story.
Yeah, I completely agree. Could not agree more. So just some characteristics really quickly, and I'll just read them all. I know we kind of all put things on here. We've got relentless, suspicious, strategic, patriotic, ruthless, arrogant, unyielding, convinced of the truth, even if it's only his truth, desperate, loyal, and traumatized.
Yeah. I like that you put patriotic, but it's also weird because it's not the kind of patriotic that we in like 2024 tend to think about. It's like Irish patriotism. Yeah. Like it's the way they're like, this is my people and the land this is my land and I'm going to make this be good. But they don't actually have much besides wanting deeply for people to have justice behind it. Mm-hmm. But they don't, it's like modern day as Americans, what we think of patriotism is like the like stupid, yay, the flag. And it's not really rooted in anything.
Yeah, like it has more of a meaning behind it because literally he's fought and killed for his country. Like he knows what it is like to be occupied by a colonizer.
I think the difference between like patriotism and nationalism is where your loyalty lies. Because I think true patriotism lies in loyalty to the ideals that a culture or group values. So you can be like patriotic to Southern American culture in the values of, you know, hospitality and kindness and all of those things. But like nationalism, which is I think is what we really see in today's world, is more loyalty to an institution, to a government entity. And I don't think like I said, Loghain's primary loyalty is to his and his family's survival. Next after that is his friends. And then it comes to the ideals of Ferelden. He'll overthrow any ruler to ensure that those first three things remain untainted.
So I have a discussion question that we can kind of roll into. Why do you love or hate Loghain? And can just kind of answer it all. So I do think that Loghain is portrayed fairly differently across Origins, Inquisition, Stolen Throne, and The Calling. Some people argue that these different portrayals are almost different characters. So do y'all think that these different portrayals across the medias are accurate to his character, or do you feel like there's almost different characterizations of Loghain, and why do you love him, etc.?
So I just have one thing to say. I challenge anyone to go to anyone who is 58 years old and ask them if they are the same person that they were when they were 19.
Preach.
Mm-hmm.
I am 32 and I am not the same person I was when I was 28.
I'm 25 and I'm not the same person I was at 19 or 20. Like everybody changes throughout the course of their life, and we've seen his entire life pretty much. I mean, from the books to Inquisition, we've borderline seen this man's entire life. So yeah, of course he changes. I would hope he's not a static character that doesn't change the whole games.
My only beef with his characterization in the game is this man is not a warrior. This man is a rogue, and I will die on this hill.
You're right, and you should say it louder.
Can you write a letter to BioWare letting them know that, like, retroactively?
Yeah, I'll
like,
let
why did we
need
another warrior? For real, I don't understand. Anyway,
there's only two rogues.
It's for real. In Stolen Throne, they won't stop talking about the fact that he's like quick with a blade and he's so agile and blah blah blah.
Sneaky.
And then he's just this big heavy armor tanky boy in Origins.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't think this through when they were planning out Origins. Maybe they were so focused on the Landsmeet consequences, but like for so many people the first time around, if you don't get Zevran up to like very, very, very high approval, he will leave and you have to kill him and his little crow lover friend. So we could have used another rogue after that. Anyway, so why do we love or hate Loghain? Just in closing, real quick.
I was going to say something about the other thing, though. I completely think that his change, a lot of people will say he's a very different character from each one, like you said, but his changes make so much sense, in my opinion. He's had his light tamped out time after time in his life. And it's like he finally realizes, I'm not going to keep waiting on somebody else to do it for me. And waiting to like put myself behind somebody who's going to be good for this, that, or the other and make everything better. I'm just going to go do what I got to do. And by the time we see him in Inquisition, he's kind of like, I'm just trying to be as good of a person as I can after screwing it up for this long. So I feel like it is a very good character growth as opposed to like different from one to the next.
And I think it shows a point of like what Loghain values, like especially if you take like a lot of prevailing psychology theories on like the stages of life and the things that you like strive for. Like when we meet Loghain in Inquisition, he very much is striving and looking for something like, I want to leave something behind that matters. Like I want to be remembered for something more than just the Battle of River Dane.
100%.
And that's a natural progression for almost all humans, where you get to a point of you're less concerned about what you achieve for yourself, and you're more concerned with what am I leaving behind. I just want to say that I support Kane's note under the why do you love or hate Loghain. Just that's my opinion.
I know I said something chaotic, but I don't even remember exactly what I said, and I don't have your notes pulled up.
It says because Pookie needs a hug.
He so does, though. Give that poor old man a hug.
He does. No, you're right. He does. Like, I do. I feel so bad for him because I simultaneously love and hate him. And I think we're supposed to hate him, especially in Origins. Like, obviously, he is the antagonist. You're supposed to hate him. He is cruel. He is awful. But at the same time, when you read some of this other stuff, I'm like, I love you because, like, you say the things I want to say. Like, he's constantly surrounded by idiots and he has to clean up all their messes and he's just so done with it. And I identify with that a lot.
So much same. I could go on for ages about how much I love Loghain, but to short and sweet it, I love how complicated he is. I love how complex he is. And I very much empathize with a character that has just been beat down and traumatized and tries his best, even though he has horrible outlooks on the world a lot of times over. He tries his best to do what he thinks is right, whether it's actually right or not. He thinks it's right, and he puts that behind. He's willing to fall on a bullet that he doesn't even need to because he thinks that that's the right decision to make. And I think that makes him really. If we're arguing about his morality, I think it's difficult to call him a good or a bad character in the sense of like, is he a good guy or a bad guy? He's clearly a bad guy in one of the games, but I think difficult.
I think I would classify Loghain, like if you had to give him a negative classification, I would classify him as a selfish character in a lot of ways. But not always, but just sometimes. But like, I think that's one thing that people really forget, especially if you don't read the books. Like, they give so much in Stolen Throne, just gives so much insight into Loghain and his character, and he's my favorite character of that book. But like, Loghain can count on one hand the people who he would consider actually care about them, and by the time we meet him in Origins, they're all gone or dead.
I would maybe push back a little in the fact that I would say it's hard to say someone's selfish if what they think they're doing is for the greater good, but in the end, it ends up just being self-beneficial. Like, if like, for instance, we're going to go back to the Kalen thing. He wasn't doing that because he thought he wanted Loghain to be happy. He thought he was doing something great for everybody. Like, he thought this was going to be a repeat of the same problems all over again. And you could maybe argue the selfishness, because you could maybe argue he partially had a little bit of bitterness in the fact that Kalen was thinking about some other things, perhaps, because Anora was kind of sort of not able to have babies. But I don't know if I still don't know if I'd call him selfish if he's trying to do good things for other people and or the country as a whole. It just ends up coming out like he's made a bad decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I don't think I would say that he is a selfish character. I think he does selfish things from time to time.
Yes.
But yeah, so anyway, this has been our Loghain episode. He's a very fascinating character. He's a very complex character. I love talking about him because it's so good when we have complex characters, right? Like we know that. That's why one of the reasons why we love Dragon Age, but I do feel like Loghain is probably one of the top of the list for most complex, most engaging. Like he's so complex and complicated, and it's just great writing.
Well, before I wrap it up, Kane, thank you for being here. If you just want to tell people, like, where can they find you on the internet or anything you want to plug, just take time to do that.
I mean, I would say you can talk with me on Discord. I am in the Discord. That's probably the main one. Otherwise, I have horrible takes on my Twitter, but I probably shouldn't plug that one. If anybody wants to follow me, they're more than welcome to message me on Discord, and I'll give it to them. But
all right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, Shelby, for bringing the research and all of that stuff. Thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Ever wanted to be a content creator but had no clue where to begin? Come join me as I sit down with content creators that have already faced the challenges you're up against, as they discuss the tips and tricks that help them be successful. Here on The Content Creator's Guide, available wherever podcasts can be found.